Hi there, Glocal citizens. Welcome back to the podcast that inspires a borderless mindset around manifesting a new world. I am your host, Florence Sadu, coming to you from a bright and sunny summer Brooklyn afternoon. It's beautiful. It reminds me of the last time I saw my guest because today is the day there's this Brooklyn annual, it's not annual. It's a couple of times in the summer and it's called The Layout. And so it's at Fort Greene Park and people gather. And today is one of those days. It is The Layout. Last I saw him, I was at a layout with friends. Today's a work day, so I won't be there today, but it's just kind of nostalgic in a summer memories kind of way. So let me get into his background. He's a videographer, composer, and musician who began his career in African dance in Colorado with Leticia Williams' Harambee and musical director Judy Fatu Henderson. He later relocated to New York, where he began studying dance and drum with pioneers Yousouf Koumbasa, Mbemba, Bangoura, and Ronald Brown. He has performed with creative masters such as Chuck Davis and BAM's Dance Africa, Reginald Yates, and Heritage OP for the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater's 40th anniversary season, with musicians such as Roy Ayers, Wunmi Olaiya, Manchild Black, and Akua Allrich, to name a few. He has also performed on and off Broadway in the musical Fela and Darker Faces of the Earth, directed by Trezana Beverley, respectively. As a videographer, most recent projects include editing the archival documentary for Kumbuka, the longest active New Orleans-based West African dance troupe. This fall, he joins Florida State University as a tenure-track professor with a focus on music for dance and choreography. He will be teaching rhythmic analysis, music for choreography, and digital audio recording, while also providing music support for African, Dunham, and contemporary classes. Mr. Farai Malianga, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Florence. It's a pleasure to be here. Good to see you.
Yes. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for being who you are. So let's jump right in. Where are you from? Where are you local? And what is your craft?
All right. I am born and raised in Zimbabwe, moving, of course, to New York and then to Colorado, where I became a part of the African dance troupe that you mentioned, and then back to New York for the last 20 years. But right now I am in Florida, in Tallahassee, Florida, with the Florida State University. I just moved here a month ago, so I'm getting acclimated, and I'm missing Brooklyn a little bit.
Okay.
Because the last time we met, that was good fun.
Yeah.
But, but I'm here and happy to be here. So things are working out really well. So yeah, that's where I'm from. That's where I'm locally, is right here in Florida State University.
And what is your craft?
All right. I say on my resume and bio that I am a videographer and composer, but first and foremost, I'm a drummer. Mm-hmm. I play music. I play African drums. I make African music. Mm-hmm. I did it because I love dance. I love to dance, but the main thing that I do now is play drums mostly for dance.
Okay, and teach.
Yeah. And teach. I could go through a whole list of things. You know how we do. And to survive in New York, I've been in New York for 20 years. And to survive in New York, you better do everything. But, to keep it simple, dance and music is my...
Okay, that is the craft that is you. Wonderful. Okay, so you grew up, born and raised in Zimbabwe. Tell us more about your Zimbabwe story. Tell us where from. And, Zimbabwe has a very interesting present and past. And so give us a little bit of a understanding of the Zimbabwe that you knew and the Zimbabwe that you now know.
That's a very deep story because I didn't really realize fully until I started talking about it a little bit more, that my sister and I grew up in Zimbabwe. So we were born in the 70s. And Zimbabwe got its independence from colonial rule in 1980. So we were actually right in the middle of the transition. In Ghana, you guys got your independence way before that. But we literally were in the transition process. So my sister and I were some of the first African kids to be in private schools. So my school had approximately 3 Black students out of a total of 300. So I never quite fully realized how much of an effect that had on my life and how I developed. But that was a major part of what we went through. But we always were adaptive. We always knew that we had to, made our own way. And it was being who you are in the context of an environment that doesn't always accept you was a big part of my narrative. At the same time, I was raised in a kind of household that was very conscious, so it never really affected me in terms of personally, but it did identify how I moved through the world. So that's how we both got started. So Zimbabwe was a very interesting place at the time. And of course, it's gone through so many transitions. It's going to be a while before it settles down. But when we were growing up, we were very privileged in that we had access to a lot of the things that were not, a part of the African community at the time.
So what brought your family to the U.S.?
So, I guess I should be more specific on my background. My dad is from Zimbabwe, and he went to Ithaca University in upstate New York. And my mother is from Bronx, New York. And so I'm the African American for real, maybe American African. I don't know how you're different.
Yes.
So she was going to Cornell University, which I didn't realize was quite a feat because she was coming from Cornell, and in '69 coming from the Bronx, and in '69 she was also one of the first to make it into a prestigious university like Cornell. So my dad was a part of the African Student Union, and my mom was very active and kind of conscious, and she was trying to understand her heritage and roots. So they met at Ithaca during some different speeches. I think one of the things they went to see is Leroy Jones, Amiri Baraka, and they ended up driving him all the way to New York. It's kind of a funny story. They gave him a ride to New York. But that was one of the first times they met. So as a result, that's kind of my background is based on those two cultures. So once I came of age, we took our O levels, or right before I took my O levels, it kind of just made sense that we needed to come to the States to take advantage of the education system.
Yeah.
That's why we came.
Right. Wow. Okay. Got it. So kind of academic parentage that a lot of our stories brought us across the ocean.
Big time, right? I mean, we it's one of those things you have to always there's different types of immigrants, right? And then, and of course you're dealing with a whole bunch of issues like racism and all these different things in the global sense. But then we also have to kind of acknowledge some of our privilege, because what our parents went through to put us in environments where we get some of the best education in the world as a result of navigating through these walls that separate Africans from the European education system, working through them, being one of the few to get through, and then come to the Americas with that education that we were very privileged to have. It's a very unique story, but it's very common in terms of the people that are in New York, for example. A lot of us Africans in New York come from that story.
Right. Exactly. And I'd say a lot of my parents' peers. So I'm going to transition into, so Colorado. So my parents ended up in Colorado, right? And so that also was an academic thing because there was nothing bringing a lot of Africans to Colorado except for school, probably. So that was, it's different now, but then it was definitely the academic journey. So, you come to New York. How did Colorado become part of your story?
Wow. Yeah, it's interesting, right? My mom was in Zimbabwe. She was a part of the UN Information Services. That's what she worked for part of the time.
Okay.
And while she was there, she met a university person. So my mom had always wanted to become a veterinarian, and she loved wildlife sciences. And so she met somebody who was from the Colorado State University while she was in the city. So when we came to the U.S., she contacted that person again, and because he was at the Colorado State University in Fort Collins, Colorado, she was like, you know what, that's where we got to go. She just wasn't comfortable raising us in New York. So we bought a Subaru, jumped in the back, and drove across country and ended up in Fort Collins, Colorado.
Okay. Wow. Okay. So you're in Colorado, the family's all there, driving I feel like the Subaru was like the Colorado car mascot.
I don't know if she knew that at the time, but we ended up being so typical Colorado.
Yeah,
it must have been a message.
Was it a wagon at that?
Yes, it was.
Or was it? Yeah.
You know about this stuff. We have more in common than we realize, huh? We know.
Yeah, exactly. So the way that we know each other is through my sister, who was a part of Harambee. And so this is kind of getting at when did the drummer, videographer in you, the creative in you, become who you are? Because, I'm sure, I have a feeling your parents were not anticipating that they'd have this creative son, and probably drove into him something that was a little bit more technical, something like that. So how did you navigate getting into the creative?
It's ironic because both of my parents are don't really fit the mold of anything. But you are 100% right. It's impossible to leave Africa and come here and thinking and telling everybody, oh, I'm going to become a creative person. And I was lucky that neither of my parents discouraged it, but I was the one who was actually more caught up in that concept. So what ended up happening was when I got into the University of Colorado, I actually applied to the engineering school, which actually was right in line to the African principal engineer doctor, right?
Yeah.
But it didn't make any sense for me. It wasn't my thing. And my mom had told me that. My mom was like, I was like, she's like, you don't really want to do this, do you? I sent you to architect camp and you really wasn't feeling it. So I don't think engineering is going to work for you. And I was like, no, I'm going to get a good job and I'm going to buy you a house and, all those like romantic things that you think about. So what ended up happening is I ended up dropping out of engineering school. And rather than have my mother pay off those bills, I started working on campus to try and pay off all the bills that had accrued. And while I was doing that, I started getting homesick. And I found Harambee African Dancers, which is the dance company that your sister was one of the founders of, under the tutelage of Leticia Williams. And so it was kind of my way of getting back in tune with my history and culture. And I just joined there as a dancer, and the drummers were not showing up on time, and I can't dance to with no music. So I started drumming. And then after a while, I hung out in the summertime with Judy, Fatu, Henderson, who was training a new set of drummers. And all of a sudden, that became my passion. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Wow. So what did you finish with?
So I ended up becoming an engineer, but I ended up becoming an audio engineer. I always say I did it. I did what I said I was going to do.
You did it.
But I became an audio engineer. So I went to the Colorado Institute of Art, where I learned, got a degree in music, video, and business, which was a combination degree that they don't have anymore. I know why they don't have it anymore. It's a freelance style degree. It's a degree that actually creates freelancers. And,
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. Wow.
So that didn't make any sense. Colorado art now is very specified. You either do audio engineering or you do fashion design. It's very specific now. But that was the last year that they did that combination program, and I was a perfect timing because it's exactly what I am today.
That's very interesting because and now you're in academia, and I always wonder about continuously now, especially when I look at what we're probably going to end up with as the new academic class, right? And the question is, are we training people to be, first of all, functional out of these art schools? Because that is always the problem, is whether or not an artist can actually sustain themselves and understand the world of business, because everything is commodified and commercialized, et cetera, et cetera. And then also, are we even training the professors to be able to teach in a way that, really enables people to be as productive as they desire?
I mean, this is exactly what happened to me. So it was never my intention to go back into academia. But exactly what your question or the problem that you're bringing up is exactly why I'm where I'm at and why I got the opportunity to be here. So I am actually, they wanted somebody who had either had a master's degree or they wanted somebody who had the real world experience that was the equivalent. And being the fact that I was in New York City working with dancers this whole time for the last 20 years, ended up making me a really good candidate, specifically because I'm bringing to the academic world a very real perspective on what it is to survive as an artist in this day and age. And, the university that I'm at right now was originally a conservatory primarily focused on ballet. And producing dancers for ballet dance companies, which is still a big part of what we do here. But I think that they began to realize that how do we actually make the students' experience relevant so they can actually make a career? Because only a few can get accepted to dance companies. But how can they make a career out of it? And there's a vast number of artists who are creating work and have always created work outside of the mainstream and have been successful artists.
Right.
But now we have this whole new age of technology where where students are literally creating work, not even students, young artists are creating work and they're blowing up on TikTok. They're blowing up on Instagram, right?
Yep.
So why even go to university? If you're making big money off of social media, why even go to university?
Right.
Well, I think my perspective is there's an art form to what we do, right? There's research and understanding of the bigger picture. So what a person like me, I feel, brings a connection to the students in terms of like, how do you make the highest forms? And when I say highest, I don't mean it in a hierarchical sense, but more in terms of the deepest in research.
Mm-hmm.
How do you make that information accessible to people to use on social media in the ways that are fun and enjoyable and entertaining, like they do, but maybe have another meaning or another intent behind them? And I think that that's where academia can come in. But if we don't connect it to the reality of what artists are doing out there in the world, it doesn't mean anything to anybody.
So then how do you, because you bring a valid point, like you can be famous on TikTok. A lot of people are now famous on TikTok or as particularly TikTok, but as, Instagram, Facebook, whatever, they've, without any formal training, just kind of become these artists. And so that's definitely disrupted and elevated to some extent artistry. But in terms of like being able to recognize the legacy and acknowledge tradition, or even to, I don't know, I kind of like where you're going with the elevate, because part of that elevation is also paying tribute to those before you in a lot of ways. So I think that a lot of artists are, a lot of the artistry is copycat artistry, but without the depth of understanding the whys, the hows. And in some ways, there's kind of workman's hazard that comes in with it. Because if you don't know some of the technical frameworks of what you're doing, you might injure yourself, or you might do something that might injure others. So, I mean, that's the value of kind of an academic framework around it. But as you mentioned, how do you make that important to someone who's already making money?
Exactly. And then that's the big question. Yeah. How do you do that? Well, you have to do both. And it's also, I think there's a sustainability issue that happens in social media.
Right. Exactly.
And you speak to it in terms of just physical well-being as well as creative well-being. Right? Because what ends up happening is that I have information based upon my study of the different things that people have done over the years. I have artists that crash and burnt that I know about. I have artists that have been able to sustain their careers. And even if you're a content creator on social media platforms, after a while, you run out of content.
Exactly.
So then how do you research? How do you continue to grow as an artist? How do you make your work better and more effective? And that's still where academia can come in and support and inform those students that are taking the time to come to college and study the background and the history, like you talk about, of the art forms that they're referencing. I mean, there's a huge movement now of Afrobeat on social media. Like everybody wants to dance African-based movements, right? But how many people know the difference between Afrobeat and Afrobeats?
Exactly.
Fela's music versus soukous from the Congo, right? And a lot of the movements they're doing are not from Nigeria.
Exactly.
So they're not Afrobeat movements. They're Congolese movements. They would be done soukous back in the 60s and 70s.
Yes.
You know about that too. Ghana highlight and all those different, origins of music. Those are very specific to different regions. And now you have all these, which I'm happy about, because they're connecting to African music. And you got African-American kids that now have direct access to young Africans who are also creating these movement styles and music styles. But there's so much more depth to it.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you for that. Because, first of all, that Afrobeat versus Afrobeats thing, it's like, you know what? Couldn't they have been a little bit more, first of all, descriptive of what the music now is? Because it's not Afrobeats. You know what I mean? It's Afro hip, Afro pop, something like that, right? It's like, it's a different kind of, because the beat is like a roots thing, right? And it carries. And sure, I mean, unfortunately, this is where that academic piece also comes in, is like there's so many people who are just not learned about Africans. And I think it's great, like you said, it's great that, finally there's more of an embrace of what's going on in Africa and the dances and everything. But this blanket Africa thing comes back to us, because there are the nuances, like you said, the Congolese, the Ghanaian, the South African, all of those things that just kind of allow for an opportunity to understand so much more about the entire continent. Again, we're happy for the window, very happy for the window, but we definitely have, there's work to be done, I'd say. So yeah. Okay. So speaking of all of this movement and things like that, I like to ask a question called Why the Where? How did you come to be living and working and playing where you currently are?
So, is this a story? I guess everything's a story.
Yes.
You know what? One of those things when you like, assume that you just land somewhere, and then when somebody asks you, you're like, wait a minute, there's a story behind everything.
Exactly.
The first time that I came to FSU to Tallahassee was with Ronald K. Brown. He was teaching at the regional dance for the RDA, Regional Dance Association. I hope I got that right. Which is a lot of Midwestern dance companies that come to one place. And most of these dancers are competitive dancers, ballet dancers. They come from studio work, but the institution is designed to give these young, talented students an opportunity to be exposed to the global or New York artists. So for 2 years straight, Ron Brown was teaching them, Ronald K. Brown of the dance company Evidence, for those that don't know. He was a very, very revolutionary choreographer that was one of the first in the 80s to embrace the fusion between African-based movement and modern dance and found a way to really fuse in a beautiful way. He was one of my inspirations. And anyway, that's why he's on my resume. But I came down with him, and we'll probably talk about more about him later, but I came down here to work with him as musical director of that program. So I would help the students who would choreograph every day and choose music. And I would also, because I'm a sound engineer, I would also be able to help them record and edit the music to make it fit the length of their pieces and all that type of thing. So that was my first time here, and I really liked it here. I mean, the institution is amazing. So, and the dance department is one of the biggest and best dance departments in the nation. There's a couple of people here, including Russell Sanders, who has done an amazing amount of work. Jawale Zolar is actually one of the main faculty here. She's the founder of Urban Bushwork. So there's been an amazing amount of work that's been done here on this campus towards developing dance. And so the building is huge. It has multiple studios, and I was enamored by it. They also work with an organization called Mancy. So they have a separate organization within the institution that brings artists from New York and from all over the world, all over the country, to perform and not only perform but work through their process. So that was the first time that I came down here, and I knew that there was something special here. The second time I actually got brought here by Mancy, which is, again, like I said, a separate organization, but it's also housed within the dance department here. And I came with my collaborator, Beatrice Capote, who's an Afro-Cuban dancer who works with Camille Brown and also has worked with Alvin Ailey. She's danced with Alvin Ailey most of her life. And so we came here to kind of do a work in progress as she was going through self-discovery about her Afro-Cuban roots, and was doing a piece about this revolutionary woman named Rita out of Cuba, who was talking about the progression of Cuba and the life of Afro-Cuban women through the revolution and through change of power, through the embargoes from the U.S. and all that type of stuff. Dealing with a gender bias, dealing with racism, dealing with patriarchy, all those things. And so she was creating a dance piece about that. And so I came in with her to compose the music for that piece. And then I told her, I was like, I like this place. I'm coming back. Even if I've got to do like, I don't know, I've got to hang lights or something like that. I was like, I'll hang lights for the shows, and then during the day I'll be in the studio working on stuff. So I was just like laughing, making jokes about it, but seriously. Next thing you know, they had a position opening up where one of their faculty was leaving. Doug Coben was leaving. He'd been here for 20 plus years, and he's an amazing guy. Was leaving the institution, so they needed somebody to replace him. So during the interim, they were bringing 4 different people to audition and teach his classes for a year. And I took advantage of it, came down here, and then I ended up getting the position.
Wow.
So that's how Florida.
Wow. That's kind of dope. You manifested that for real, though. You're like...
it's weird. Like, I mean, those things where sometimes I want to act like I'm lucky, or I want to do what everybody says, but nothing is really luck. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think I think everything is intention.
Yes.
It may not manifest exactly the way you envision it, but when you have an intention to be somewhere, it's going to happen one way or another.
Yes. I would agree with that. And, I mean, I would say, there is luck in the sense of, just the randomness of things happening. Because I think that's where the luck kind of comes in a little bit more than the intention of it. So, I would agree. It's like, you have the intention. And I've just been feeling that so much more lately, actually. Maybe it's just the maturity of my own self, the evolution of my own, like, whatever you want to call it. My guest in a recent episode, she was an astrologer. And so she was really making the point of like,
all right,
you can manifest anything that you desire. You just have to be intent on making that happen. And so, I'd like to bring that. That's why, manifesting a new world. Yes, we can all do that.
That's real. That is so real.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Okay, so now you're in Florida. Okay, so you're in Tallahassee. So tell us a little bit more about the Tallahassee that you've come to. I've never been to that part of Florida. So for our global listeners, tell us more about that space. You've mentioned the campus, it's beautiful. Is most of what you're doing
Right.
now revolving around campus? What is the town like? How are you understanding Florida?
Whoa. Okay. It's one of those things. You're kind of messing me up right now because we start classes tomorrow.
Okay.
And so I'm trying to zone out into the idea of like, what am I going to teach in my class? And what am I, I'm trying to get very rudimentary and basic. I still need to finish all my paperwork. I need to start learning more about tenure because I'm part of a tenure track
Yes,
professor.
right.
But what you're asking me is to survey the overall bigger picture, which I've been avoiding right now, but I'll get into it because it's your show. It's not my world. It's your show. Tallahassee has an incredibly deep history. There is, and this is what I'm learning, right? Aside from the initial thing, which is really enjoying the campus, it is whenever you're in more rural America, there is institutions that create their own little world, and then there's the bigger world that they're enveloped in. Couple different things. And I think I'll just state the facts and then leave it there. First of all, FSU was originally a women's college, and University of Florida, was the major college for the state. And at some point, they realized that they wanted a local college that was a little bit, that more people could be a part of. I think it had to do with the GI Bill, if I'm not mistaken. It had to do with World War II. They decided to integrate FSU. So that's one aspect of what it is. I'll leave the audience to kind of make their own assessments of that reality. FSU was originally a women's college and then became a college that had men as well. There's tracks at the bottom of the hill. Across the tracks is FAMU, which is a predominantly Black institution.
And that's Florida A&M University for those who aren't familiar.
Florida A&M University. I don't want to mess up the acronym, but yeah, you get it. So you go down the hill, cross the tracks, and then there's FAMU. I know about FAMU. In fact, a bunch of people from FAMU, when we went, me with Harambee and your sister, went to the Blacks and Dance conference back in '95, I think it was. We had actually bumped into a bunch of students that were at FAMU, that were from FAMU, and they had their own African dance department. I remember them sitting around rehearsing or practicing, and we ended up walking in and having a great conversation. Little did I know that literally three of them, not even three of them, I'd say like 4 or 5 of them, I ended up interacting with over the last 20 years. And one by one, they were like, "Oh yeah, I was there." And I was like, "No, you were at Blacks and Dance." Yeah, I was there. And then we ended up sharing stories, including Latoya Craig Davis, who teaches here at the university. We sat down and found out that we were both there at that conference 20 years ago. 20 years ago. I'm lying. 25.
25.
Girl. All right, so I'm not yet.
more than 25 years ago, actually.
More than 25. Yeah. These ones that I do know math. Certain things I don't
yeah, no, I get it.
But anyway, so yeah, and then in addition to that, another lady that I met down there by the name of Onye Ozuzu, who happened to be a friend who I ended up meeting in 2000 when I was here in Florida for another gig, was also there at that FAMU meeting. Then she ended up, Leticia Williams was looking for somebody, so I recommended that she call my teacher because the University of Colorado Boulder was looking for somebody to take over the professorship position that they just created for African dance. So Onye, I helped Onye get over there. She then went to Chicago University, but she's now dean at, I might be even wrong, I've got to do my research. She's now either the dean or president at the University of Florida. So,
oh, wow, okay.
So all these intersections are happening. Why I say all that stuff is I am definitely meant to be here, but there is a huge divide that is a part of Tallahassee history. The African American population here has been here for a long time and has dealt with a lot of different things. And some of those remnants still exist. FSU, Florida State University, is a special island in the midst of all of that history and culture.
Got it.
So that's what I'm still trying to figure out. I mean, I think we may have to do another interview in a year from now for me to really go into depth about it.
Sure.
But that's what I'm learning about. It's just amazing. The segregation is still a tinge of that. And I think a lot of what's happening now, bringing people like me to this campus, is to start to create that open dialogue to try and undo some of those segregationist mentalities that were once a part of Tallahassee.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. So that is your Florida right now. So you're kind of an intersectional person in that regard. And I want to get a sense of, what you're hearing either there or here or in some other part of the world that you have found Glocal speak that rings in your ears. So this is where I ask you to share a word or phrase or saying that is a meaningful part of your local experience and why or how you came to value this as Glocal speak. So I know you haven't been there that long. So if you want to choose another of your localities, that's fine, but go ahead.
So phrase. We belong everywhere. If I was to make a phrase, do you want a story to back up that phrase or just the phrase?
Give us some context.
All right. I was walking through a neighborhood that felt like it was very elite, and I was afraid to be in that neighborhood, just walking along, because I like to walk. And, different cities, you don't necessarily belong in neighborhoods. You got to be careful about where you walk. And I walked through there, and then I saw a sign that made it clear that it used to be a plantation that was now converted into a suburban area for homes. And so I'm saying to myself, should I really be walking through here? I don't want, neighborhoods to feel skeptical about my presence. I wasn't sure about that. And let me be clear, people here have been very, very nice and very welcoming. But there's a small contingent of people that have those conservative beliefs. So you have to be cautious. As I'm walking through there, feeling some kind of way, I bump up on one of these the poles that have the writing, some sort of writing or something that has to do with historical context. And on it said, this area has been maintained as a tribute because it was originally the gravesite of the slaves that worked on this land. Wow. And that's when I realized, I'm walking through a neighborhood that I'm scared to walk through, and yet African peoples have been here since the beginning of this city. Yeah. And contributed to it. Yeah. And so I have a right to walk through that neighborhood.
Yeah. Wow, that's deep. And I guess it's in a lot of ways profound that they were thoughtful enough to recognize that this was a burial ground, because
absolutely.
A lot of ways and shapes and forms, it's not.
It's not. And it's one of those things, it's such a complicated situation that we live in because you're basically finding those allies, right? At the same time. And I say that being respectful and thankful for allies, at the same time knowing that work is to benefit the society. I try to tell my students all the time, it's I'm not asking you to be open-minded and, because for my benefit, I'm going to figure out a way to survive. But in order for you we have to get rid of certain things in order for you to liberate yourself from the past and the history. And so all of us have to be super open-minded to learn about other cultures, not because to benefit the cultures that we're so-called saving. I don't want to get into the missionary, conversation. Yes. But you're doing it for yourself to understand that if you respect people, you get the chance to be a part of their knowledge base and you get to share in their knowledge base. If you don't, and I have to be careful about what I say because this HB7, if you know about Florida, you know what's going on right now with CRT and what you can and cannot say. So
Right. So again, the acronyms CRT is critical race theory. And HB7 is House Bill number 7. And so now that is a local bill in Florida, or is this yes. So this is a local one where they are basically, all across, a lot of the South has been very, very against teaching true history. And so this is something that's on the ballot for this fall, right? Is that they want to legislate the ways that slavery can be discussed in the classroom. Yeah.
So I may be being I might be being a little cryptic just for fun, but since I'm on campus, I'm trying to practice the ways in which I can get my point across without violating.
Sure. Right. Exactly. We love that you're tenure track and we want you to stay that way. So we will not allow you to say or do anything that would jeopardize that position. Thanks for joining us for part 1 of my conversation with Farai Malianga. Be sure to catch us next time when we talk more about Farai's current works, his mindset, and how the artist became the academic. As always, you can catch us each and every Tuesday with new episodes at glocalcitizenspod.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Also, please like, share, subscribe, tell a friend. It helps people find good content. And until next time, bye for now.